Good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Skokie Village Board for Monday, March the 18th, 2019. This evening we will be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Cub Scout Pack 968. Gentlemen?
Will the audience please rise? Color guard, post the colors. Please join us for our Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. 2. Color guard retreat. Color guard dismissed.
Thank you. Great job. The meeting will come to order and the clerk will please call the roll.
Trustee Roberts? Here. Trustee Sutker?
Here.
Trustee Ulrich is absent today. Trustee Bromberg?
Here.
Trustee Klein?
Here.
Trustee Gray Keeler?
Here.
Mayor Van Dusen?
Here, we have a quorum. Next item on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda for this evening's meeting. A motion is in order. Trustee Roberts, seconded by Trustee Sutker. Is there anything on the consent agenda anybody would like to have removed? If not,
Trustee Roberts?
Aye.
Trustee Sutker?
Aye.
Trustee Bromberg?
Aye.
Trustee Klein?
Aye.
Trustee Gray Keeler?
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen?
aye, the motion passes. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the chairman of the Beautification and Improvement Commission to help us make the awards for beautification of the village this evening. I'd like to introduce the chairman, Ferdinand Soko. And also, I would like to introduce the village's two foresters, Liz Zimmerman, I saw her, I was just talking to her, and also Kathy Stevens. Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening to all of you. Thank you for being here. It's a good showing. I love it. I don't have to introduce the foresters now since the mayor has done so, but I would like to introduce the rest of the commission members. If you are here, please stand up and Sharon Bitlove, you here? Janet Envia, Dahlia Horowitz, Dahlia, George Hubchuk, Chuck Levine, Ed Padash, Mitch Sandler, in the back, Josh Payer, Elaine Steiner, and our trustee liaison, Ilanka Ulrich, who is not here tonight. Thank you so much. Have a seat.
Thank you.
You know, I stand before you tonight to recognize all of you and want to thank all of you for doing a tremendous job in making our village shine, making our village beautiful for all the rest of the community and the rest of the county and state to notice the village of Skokie as a very beautiful town. No matter where I go, you know, I introduce myself as a commission in the Beautification Commission, and they say, Well, congratulations, because we noticed that Skokie is very beautiful, and I'm just not making that up, because that's all the way to Crystal Lake. I hear the same thing. And thank you so much for being here tonight and to be recognized. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, as we present the awards, would you please join us? And any of the other trustees, please come down. You got it. Well, someone's going to have to help.
I think it was you. I apologize, I'm going to have to go all the way through first.
Take your time.
We're almost there. There we go. Now- Why is it? Okay, it's not showing up. Good evening. The procedure for those who are first-time winners is that we will call the name on the property. You'll come up and greet the trustees, and we'll give you a plaque and a rose, and then take your pictures, and then you can go back to your seat. After we're done with the awards, we will retire to the back of the hall where we have refreshments set up. And as always, I apologize ahead of time for any names I mess up. First award is Armando Anguiano. I know you're here. That's why I like this too dark. I can barely see which ones are the
Don't look at me. My eyes are.
I know. I like pastels. Okay. Next are Michael and Jacqueline Brennan. You messed up too?
I figured it out.
Good.
I did a right click the first time, but then I.
That's what happened with me. That's why I screwed it up. See, I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. Don't cover Ferdinand either.
Nice.
We got to get a taller chair. Next, Abe and Florvel Bulaklak. It is really warm in here tonight.
My hands are cold. So.
It'll warm me up a little.
Nice.
Okay. Somas Chinratana.
That was good. Did you?
That's why I always greet them. I get to hear their name at least once.
Nice.
Antonio and Gloria Clemente. Got pretty good attendance tonight.
Yeah.
Skokie Culvers. That's a lot of flowers.
Yeah, they were.
I we should have told them to bring supplies for
That's
back.
right. Yeah. That's awesome.
Christopher Dysinger and James Huffer. You know that?
Good friends.
There we go. 1, 2, 3. Congratulations.
Yay.
Elias and Griselda Espinoza. Skip the next two.
Okay. What's their
Go to
name?
Fong.
Fong.
Skip the next two and go to Fong.
Very good.
Conrad Fong. Oh, here's Josh. Can we leave you?
You want to do this? You're fine. Probably not. You can just stand there and look nice.
What the hell? Oh, that's the, I thought it was something flying. It was your
Yeah,
pointer.
I'm like using an arrow.
I we skip full on.
Skip full on and
Yeah.
give a
Duke and Karen Gavrilovich.
Oh, no.
1, 2, 3.
Paul and Juliet Gavargas. This is their 6th award. I feel like I know them already. He walked in and we recognized each other.
Oh, sure.
Is that cool?
1, 2, 3. Congratulations.
Mario and Nenny Gatanko. All right, then we're going to skip 2. Then we'll go to Juskowski. Skip 2. James and Mary Jaskolski. Oh, here's another good one. Are they here? Oh, here they are. Yeah, I knew they were here. Olga Konovalova. Kevin and Dale Matten. We're going to skip more.
There's a pretty good turnout.
Yeah, it's a very good turnout this year. My pleasure. Every one of them this year is one less we have to chase down. Don and Cher McCrimmon. Here comes another good one.
That's nice.
Interesting design to the house. It's almost like a modified A-frame in the front.
Yeah, Kate.
All right. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Congratulations. Thank you.
Matilda Nulandowski.
Knew it.
Domsky, excuse me. I knew it was going to blow that
This way we pass.
one. Okay, we skipped Nikos.
I want to.
Mark and Josette Parisi. I like the welcome sign too.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely. That
nice,
doesn't
nice
hurt.
touch. Nice touch.
1, 2, 3. Congratulations.
Michael and Brenda Perry.
He's a long-time winner.
I don't know how many times they've won. Huh?
No, they won a bunch of times.
Yeah. I don't think they've made 5 yet, though.
We're pretty good about keeping track of that.
Oh, good
Oh,
job.
it is?
8 years.
Soren and Monica Racine. Skip 2. Go to Village Inn. Ed, go to Village Inn next.
One, two, three. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Village Inn. They must have won a lot of times.
One, two, three. Congratulations.
All right, skip 1. Theodore and Canoe Johanna. Whose phone is that? Next is a 5-year award winner, Richard and Mary Goslin. This is their son.
I was gonna say it.
Yeah, this is their son.
Sure, yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I'll do yours first. One, two, three.
Thank you very much.
One, two, three. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Are there any winners who came in after we started the meeting that I missed? Please come up now. No? Okay, we're done. Would the award winners please join us and their guests? There we go. Thank you. I tried.
Fancy.
Congratulations to all of the winners. In a true sense, it's the village that really is the winner for your wonderful work beautifying your home and the entire village. We thank you for everything that you do, and I do want to again thank the Beautification and Improvement Commission. I think, as you can see, they do a lot of work in trying to, thank you. Susan will be my wife will be very happy this evening.
Mayor, are we
Go
going
ahead,
on
go ahead.
break?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll
You're
go
all
ahead.
welcome for refreshments in the back.
We'll take a brief recess. Week, I think it was last. The meeting of the village board will resume with a report of our village manager, John Lockerbie.
Thank you, Mayor Van Duzen and Village Board. Good evening, everyone. Items A, B, and C of my report were included as part of the consent agenda and approved earlier in the meeting this evening. That completes my report.
Next up is report of our Corporation Counsel, Michael Lorge.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Item A on my agenda was adopted as part of the consent agenda at the beginning of this evening's meeting, and that would conclude my report. Thank you.
And I think that's a record. First time that I can remember that we had the manager and our council both have their entire agendas on the consent.
We could look for something else, right, John?
That's right. Just say the word.
Conspiracy. Next item on the agenda is a matter of new business. Chairman Paul Luke of our Plan Commission with Peter Pyer.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the board. We have a request from Aurora Ice Cream LLC through the modified review process to amend a special use permit which was approved in 2012. The amendment is 12-3-Z3888. The special use was approved to allow the construction of an Oberweis Dairy and a limited service restaurant known as the Burger Joint with a one-lane drive-through in the unified development at 4811 Dempster Street. At the time that the special use permit was issued, it was known that the Illinois Department of Transportation, better known as IDOT, was planning a significant improvement to Dempster Street, Niles Center Road, and Dempster Street, Skokie Boulevard intersections. However, as these plans were not refined or scheduled for construction, the petitioners decided to design their parking lot to maximize the parking to serve their customers. The IDOT improvements to the intersections have now been finalized, and property owners adjacent to the intersections have been informed of required land acquisition dedications to make the intersection improvements feasible. Land dedications are required from the subject property along Dempster Street, Niles Center Road, and Skokie Boulevard frontage of the property. The petitioners have submitted and revised landscape and site plans for approval indicating the required land dedications. The revised site plan indicates a change primarily in the parking lot at the northeast corner of the site. The landscaping area will be reduced and parking areas along Dempster Street will be eliminated. The revised plan will provide good traffic flow and adequate parking as provided to meet the off-street parking requirements. The overall site parking will only be reduced by 3 spaces. The proposed Dempster Street, Skokie Boulevard intersection improvements will also require relocation and reconfiguration of the restaurant's ground sign. The Appearance Commission reviewed and approved the revised sign drawing at its February 13th meeting. And staff reviewed and approved the adjacent landscaping plan. The Corporation Counsel, the Community Development Director, myself, also reviewed the request. It is our opinion that the request site and landscaping plan modifications are in substantial compliance with the intent of the original special use permit, and we should, it is recommended that the petitioner's request be granted.
A motion to accept the recommendation of the chairman of the Plan Commission for a modified review of Aurora Ice Cream LLC is in order. Trustee Klein, seconded by Trustee Bromberg. Are there any comments or questions? If not, call the roll, please.
Trustee Roberts.
Aye.
Trustee Sutker.
Aye.
Trustee Bromberg.
Aye.
Trustee Klein.
Aye.
Trustee Greg Keeler.
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen.
Aye, the motion passes. Next items on the agenda are 2 reports of our Plan Commission. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First case tonight is case 2018-46P, a chapter amendment, parking for religious assembly. At the December 6th meeting of the Plan Commission, we reviewed language to review and possibly modify the zoning chapter of the village code regarding religious assembly. Since there have been several cases recently for religious assembly that have gone through either a public hearing or permit process that had vastly different parking demands, the village manager requested a review of parking requirements for all religious assembly uses. The current parking requirement of one space for 4 seats or for each 80 lineal inches of seating area is no longer appropriate to accommodate the current and future diverse population of the village. Staff concluded that all religious assembly uses should be examined by the Plan Commission and parking determination be made on a case-by-case basis following a parking study that analyzes the real parking demand for each use, similar to many uses listed in the zoning chapter. A commissioner stated that it was not appropriate to lump religious assembly uses together with all types of assemblies such as gymnasiums or fitness centers or even religious schools with assembly halls within. He suggested that they should be made as a separate category. He suggested tabling the case and sending it back to the staff and Corporation Council to revise the language. The Community Development Director stated that when reviewing the latest religious assembly use with the legal department, they set aside the established parking requirements and studied the situation based on parking and traffic analysis prepared by experts. In that case, they were satisfied with the requirement of 1 space for every 2 prayer mats and decided that each case going forward should be assessed on its own with a parking study. Another commissioner commented that the Plan Commission needs guidelines to determine parking requirements. He asked if a parking and traffic study can be required and also as an operational plan. He thought that not having any to go by would create neighborhood problems. It should be noted that the purpose of having a professional parking study is to assess the real parking demand for all the activities that occur in a religious assembly building, not just religious services, but including banquet and other gathering rooms, educational facilities, and social services that may be provided. The outcome of a parking study is regularly used by a congregation to justify reductions from the existing parking requirements and would otherwise be required if parking relief was being requested. On numerous occasions, the Plan Commission has recommended and the Village Board has approved requests to deviate from the existing parking standards and base the parking requirements on other factors for religious assembly. A required parking study would provide concrete professional determinations concerning the actual parking demand as a base for the Plan Commission to move forward. Interested parties. 2 representatives from the Skokie Central Congregation, Skokie Central Traditional Congregation spoke. The first stated that Skokie welcomes everybody, but they are a small Orthodox group who had to do a $2,000 parking study for people who don't drive to the Sabbath on high holidays. It was hard for them to find a space because they need to locate within 2-mile maximum distance to accommodate their walking members. If they were faced with more restrictions, the congregation would close. The second stated they did do a parking study for 2 or 3 people that drive. She agreed that each case should be looked at separately. Things cannot be done just one way. Skokie is making it too restrictive for future congregations to do business. A motion was made which failed to table the case and refer to Corporation Council to consider changes in the language. The Community Development Director then suggested that they could have the Corporation Council examine the report as part of the motion and do so before the case goes to the board for approval. A commissioner proposed to eliminate all language that compares religious assembly to other assemblies and to change the language of staff's recommendation to read, make parking for religious assembly uses determined by Plan Commission upon consideration of testimony and evidence brought by the petitioners. Another commissioner made a motion to accept the staff report with the proposed language change as an interim step and reviewed by the Corporation Council. This motion was approved on a vote of 8 ayes, no nays, and 1 member absent. Subsequent to the Plan Commission meeting, the Corporation Council reviewed the staff report and the request of the Plan Commission. All religious uses would have the same requirement to provide evidence of the real demand for parking based on the way the facility is used. As stated in the petition for parking determination, any applicant seeking a parking determination, regardless of which use is requesting parking determination, is required to submit a minimum, a signed statement describing the operation of the proposed use and any other relevant information that affects the type and amount of parking necessary for the use. Staff would prefer not to add additional text that differentiates religious assemblies parking determinations differently than other parking determinations, which simply say off-street parking requirements shall be determined by the Plan Commission. Providing testimony and evidence is a function of the Plan Commission meeting. Therefore, the standard language is more appropriate. Staff and council have initiated a new study case to provide clear guidance for parking determination in general. The recommended language is as follows, which has been reviewed by and endorsed by the Corporation Council. It would read this way: Section 118-218, required number of motor vehicle parking spaces. The minimum number of off-street motor vehicle parking spaces required for a designated use shall be as follows. 2, schools, places of worship, institutions, auditoriums, and other places of assembly. Assembly use except religious assemblies, auditoriums, gymnasiums, stadiums, grandstands, meeting halls, and institutional establishments, 1 parking space for each 4 seats, or for each 80-inch lineal measurement of seating space in the main auditorium of assembly. And in bold, religious assembly, off-street parking requirements shall be determined by the Plan Commission.
A motion is in order to accept the 2018-46P zoning chapter amendment presented by the Skokie Plan Commission, parking for religious assembly. A motion is in order. Trustee Roberts, seconded by Trustee Sucker. Are there any comments or questions? Trustee Roberts.
So, Paul and Peter, just the last text that you just read, it talks about, how it's now going to be in the hands of the Plan Commission for final determination. Is there another section of the text that is the parking study still required? Is that in another part of the ordinance? Or
Go ahead.
there's still a requirement of a parking study, right?
Well,
Or
a
is there?
parking determination is necessary, just as it states, that off-street parking requirements shall be determined by the Plan Commission. And the Plan Commission can basically ask whatever they need to make that parking determination. There is a study case that's been set to clarify what exactly is needed, but in religious uses, we will always ask for a parking study by a professional engineer.
Okay. And what's the average cost of a parking study?
They are several $1,000s.
But, what occurs to me is that part of this whole equation, though, is they do this, eventually, if they're granted a special use and they have the parking study, they're not paying property taxes.
right.
usually after that. So there's probably going to be a substantial savings once they have the religious use established on that property, right?
To themselves, you mean, in
Yeah.
the sense of, yes, they would.
Down
their
the
taxes
road
reduced,
eventually.
yes.
So, right now, as the ordinance stands, it's one parking space for every 4 seats.
Yes.
So by having it by the Plan Commission, in fact, we've had some recent cases where we've approved less than 1 parking space per 4 seats, the recent mosque that, so for small denominations of religious organizations, this will allow them a little more flexibility in finding a place in Skokie, do you think, in the long run?
Well, I think it reflects more the way that different religions operate. If we went back 50 years ago when this ordinance was probably created at 1 per 4 seats, probably thought of the traditional churches where the family drove in the car and there would be several children and they'd all come together and they'd all leave at the same time. Currently, we've seen a much different pattern of religious assembly, and that's where we come now down to a lot of times where there's just a single male adult coming to the services, and they'll come on separate cars, and so that's why these studies have shown that in the last 2 cases, actually, there was 1 per 2, and at the last one where it was a synagogue, it was really determined it was 1 per 3, but the assembly was so small that the Plan Commission agreed that 1 per 4 would be adequate and there wouldn't be a problem. But it seems to really be changing from what we had thought of in the past.
If I might add, trustee, we know federal law and our own intentions within the village is to maintain an even playing field for all houses of worship. And yet, we understand that there can be variances of all kinds in any religious assembly as to number of people, was it a large congregation, small, and that the one thing that seems to be clear that would comply with law is by using this tool in an even-handed way of a parking study for each and every one. It takes some of the guesswork out, it brings some professionalism to it, but most of all, it'll help us account for variations in congregation size or holiday observance. And the most important part is it helps the community as a whole in dealing with parking, makes us welcoming for all different houses of worship, and is compliant, we believe, with state and federal law.
Any other comments or questions? Trustee Sucker.
And also these religious facilities are sometimes used for things other than a holiday where, or for example, with the Jewish community, they might walk to services on a Saturday, but the religious building might be used for other things on other days. So I would assume a study would allow us to know more information.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Call the roll, please.
Trustee Roberts.
Aye.
Trustee Sutker.
Aye.
Trustee Bromberg.
Aye.
Trustee Klein.
Aye.
Trustee Greg Keeler.
Aye.
Mayor Vendus.
Aye, motion passes.
Thank you. My next case is case 2018-47P, Chapter Amendment, Reorganization of General Provisions. At the February 7th meeting of the Plan Commission, we reviewed language reviewed requests to review the language and possibly modify the zoning chapter of the village code with the purpose of reorganizing and modernizing Division 1-1 general provisions, which are rules that apply across zoning districts. Staff stated that a new section has been added to the zoning chapter and other sections modified. It has become too long and difficult to navigate, especially scrolling pages online. Staff has taken on the tedious task to reorganize the portion of the code to provide some order, generally grouping all the sections that apply throughout the village and all the sections regulating specific uses. Staff summarized the 12 points listed in the staff report, which highlights the changes and references the tables created to make it easier to find current articles and sections in the new layout. Discussions from the commission verified that most of the information was just shuffled around. Staff made one amendment to the original report involving a section title and noted that other changes were annotated in the margins of the recommended text. Other items discussed involved impermeable surface credits, antennas, wind energy systems, and solar panels, front yard fences, and site triangles when existing with an existing alley. No interested parties spoke at the meeting, and the Plan Commission recommends a vote of 6 ayes, no nays, and 3 absent that the request be approved.
Thank you. A motion on Plan Commission Case 2018-47P, zoning chapter amendment, reorganization of general provisions. Motion is in order. Trustee Gray Keeler, seconded by Trustee Bromberg. Are there any comments or questions on this? Trustee Klein.
Do you have a copy of the 45 pages you sent us that we have? Do you have it with you?
I do have it.
On page 6, section 118-56. Can you kindly put that into English for me? Slowly.
This is one that you should be familiar with.
But not in this language, I'm sorry, didn't grasp.
It hasn't been rewritten, so. Okay, this is about when you have a through lot, where you might have 2 streets, street frontages. And that's when you determine what's the front lot line and what the setback is from which street. I could read it to you and then I'd, but let's see. Okay. So this one states basically that you have 2 streets and you have 2 front yards. But the actual front yard is determined at some point that, let's say along whatever the street is the front yard, and it's been established for all the other houses on that street. So that street is your required front yard, and the other street is your rear yard. So you'll see that quite often where we have a through lot. The garage will be on, all the garages will be lined up on one street, and the houses will face the other street. And that's the designated front yard, even though technically there are 2 front yards.
All right, so this is going back to where we determine a front yard by the size. Is that what you're referring to?
No, this is...
That chapter?
That's a separate section, which was worked on also.
Okay.
But this one is basically saying when you have 2 parallel streets, or they could be not parallel, one street is designated as the front yard street, and all the houses along that street are set back at the same distance. And then the other street is then not considered the front yard, and there you'd have your accessory structures such as the garages, and they could be located closer to the street than the street that's designated as the front yard street.
Thank you. That was
Did that
very
help?
clear. When I read it the first time, it was real clear.
The one you're talking about is if, and this happens quite often, especially up in the northern area of town, where the front yard setbacks may vary.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, it was they took an average of all the houses on the street, and to get that front yard that house is allowed. And that's why you've had several zoning board cases revolving around that. In this case, there was an amendment to simplify that, saying it just takes the average of the 2 houses next door instead of looking at the entire street.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Trustee Roberts.
Peter, I just wanted you to know that I'm going to sleep better tonight because you've closed the loophole for window wells that affect side yard drainage. So
It was a difficult discussion.
I'm glad you caught it.
Call the roll, please.
Trustee Roberts,
Aye.
Trustee Sutker,
Aye.
Trustee Brumberg,
Aye.
Trustee Klein,
Aye.
Trustee Greg Keeler,
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen.
Aye, the motion passes.
That concludes my report.
Thank you. The concluding item this evening is citizen comments. Is there anybody in this vast audience who wishes to address the board? If not, I think it's Trustee Roberts this evening.
Yeah.